Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So this is the sequel to My Lady Mage, which is the first book of the Warriors of the Mist series trilogy. I mean, you can sort of tell that because, the book cover in front of you, a Warriors of the Mist novel. Anyways, so the first novel is mostly about Gideon falling in love with Merewen, and a little bit about Murdoch falling in love with Merewen's step-aunt Alina. Okay, second novel in the series. This is primarily about Murdoch and Alina having a thing and having sex because it's a romance novel. Of course, there's sex in it. And Duncan, who is the next of our Warriors 5, he winds up with a thing with a sorceress named Lavinia. Now, the interesting thing about Lavinia in this is that, well, it's not so much. It's not so much that she's it's not so much that she's a sorceress as that Duncan and the rest of the so-called damned, these warriors of the mist, they are prejudiced against sorcery because one of their number, Cain, is the grandson of a dark mage, the kind of people who sacrifice animals and other people for power, and so on and so forth. And they generally don't really like magecraft, in no small part because apparently none of them understand the distinction between dark magecraft and regular light magecraft, earth mages, so to speak. And that strikes me as a little bit odd, actually, because when you exist in a universe where magic is real, these are the kinds of things that you probably should know, especially if you're going to be an avatar of the gods, and indeed have been one for literally 1,000 years. It's slightly hinky to me, but I suppose they're all so very determined to fight with nothing but sword and their wits that none of them really ever thought about the difference. Anyways, so Duncan gets sent off to this, not a nunnery, but, a sort of a religious way station off in the middle of nowhere with a bunch of priestesses. It's basically a nunnery, a convent. He gets sent off to it because it has a reputation for having a very large esoteric library. Now, in the last book, there was lightning trying to murder birds, and evil stalks the land, and people have gone missing without a trace. One of those, it's as though they got raptured away because all of their stuff was left behind, and, they didn't take anything with them, so clearly they haven't just run. And so, knowing that some sort of evil magic is stalking the land, Duncan, who is a man who wishes he was a scholar but wound up getting hooked up in this whole mercenaries business before everybody wound up avatars of the gods, he goes off to pretend to be a traveling scholar and see if he can get a hold of the books that he needs in order to understand what's going on. Well, when he gets there, he meets Lavinia, and there's a whole thing with enchanted coins that effectively take over the bodies of two guardsmen, because there's a bunch of traders who are coming by, and the traders have guards, and a couple of the guards get possessed by evil and try to kill Lavinia, and it's a whole thing, and he winds up basically breaking character before he even has a chance to really establish his character. So he winds up falling in love with, in, that fine romance novel style of I saw her and then boom, we were in love, because eye contact is all it takes. Um, and they they wind up having a lot of there's a lot of soul searching on both their parts. In his part, it's very much soul searching about that kind of really boils down to all magic is evil. But Lavinia doesn't seem evil, and she does magic. Does that mean all magic isn't evil? I don't know. Um, there's a lot of that in this book, with their goddess finally stepping in and saying, "No, I just because I don't like dark magic doesn't mean I don't like all magic. Seriously, guys, it no, she's not evil." That's basically what he winds up doing. Lavinia, in the meanwhile, um, is well, she's doing that thing that the duty driven by fear thing, which is the I promised, I gave my word to do this set of things, and my word is my bond, and so I should stick this out and do my duty, but on the other hand, people need me to use my magic powers to defeat Duke Kirthan, because Duke Kirthan, who is ultimately the villain of this book, because the first book we're, talking about Merewen's uncle, and he's an abusive jerk, but ultimately he's just, a nobleman who's an abusive jerk. Duke Kirthan, who is effectively actually the king, he's actually evil, and he's evil in a I will commit dark sorceries and raise a demon from the underworld because I think that's a great idea sort of guy. Um, and in this book, this is the book when we really, really sort of start looking at Kirthan. We start hearing from his perspective more because Lavinia is his half-sister. So he's trying to track her down because, she's also a sorceress, and so if you use a sorceress's magic for your blood, for your blood magics, then you're effectively bleeding using her magic battery along with her life energy battery, so it's double the oomph. So he's trying to hunt her down, and um and she's really, really terrified of him because he's a genuinely bad person. He's one of those people who's just a bad person. He likes causing harm, and also he likes power, and he has power already, so those things all compound each other into a great big ugly mess, as such things do. And so she's terrified of him, and she kind of takes refuge in, I promised the sisters in the convent that I would, lead them, and I promised them we wouldn't hand the books over to anybody, and there's Duncan going, if we let Duke Kirthan roll over everybody, then they're gonna die, and it won't matter what promises you made, because everybody will be dead. It's very much one of those conversations. And I think the most interesting thing about this book is how much of an interfering busybody the Lord and Lady, if pretty much just the lady of the river, becomes, because she's the goddess who collected Gideon and his 4 friends and said, well, you screwed up. You promised me anything if I would fix it. So you're going to be doing anything because I'm going to fix it, and you guys are going to be living at my beck and call for the rest of forever until I decide to forgive you. And normally, she kind of just pitches them out to solve whatever problem, and then they come back and she, judges them on how well or poorly they did. And this time, she crops up in the first book saying, hey, Gideon, you can totally have a relationship with this woman. That's fine by me. And Gideon is completely taken aback that she even showed up. And then she shows up for Duncan, or rather to talk to Duncan's erstwhile true love Lavinia to say, uh, we're not here, the gods, to lead you by the hand through everything. You have to make choices, and also don't make a stupid choice. And it's remarkably very directly interfering. Um, and it's the kind of really remarkably direct interference that that you don't even see all that often in other fantasy series. If you compare this, say, to Mercedes Lackey's Valdemar series, let's talk about that for a minute. In that book, you have both Calanel, the Star-Eyed, and the Karsite god, whose name will come to me at the most inconvenient moment possible. And those gods, they periodically show up if somebody says something, and they directly intervene. But but there's a quality in this series of interfering busybody that doesn't really seem to kick in quite so much with either the god of the Shinna in Teledras and Kaledain, or with the god of the Karsites. That there's just this quality of this god showing up and just poking at everybody, and it's very odd. I mean, I'm overstating it a little bit, but it's the nature of her interference that really feels more, it doesn't just feel like a Deus Ex Machina. It feels like somebody's interfering parents, sort of prodding everybody to not do something stupid. Um, and while gods are often described as being like parents, it's, I don't know, there's just this very down home, ungodly, no larger picture quality to some of this. Anyway, so that's the story of this book, is basically Duncan convincing Lavinia to go with him. And also, of course, one last person, Sigil, who is a major character in this, who does not, in fact, have a romantic thing. Sigil, who was the previous captain of the guard, who we find out is Captain Terrence in this book. His memory got wiped at the end of the last book because he was wearing a magical Who's-It that Duke Kirthan had given him, and when it got exploded, his memory got wiped in the process, because, magic, memory wipe, it's convenient and a whole bunch of other things. Anyways, so he basically is spending the bulk of this book trying to convince everybody that no, he genuinely doesn't remember anything, and no, he genuinely isn't evil, and he doesn't know why he was working for the bad guy, but he knows he wouldn't want to do it now. And he and Murdoch become very close friends, and it's an interesting side story in this, particularly because there is no romance involved. There's a lot of bromance going on because you have these four warriors who've been the bestest of friends, who were the bestest of friends before things happened and have continued to be so, kind of necessity, of course, over the last 1,000 years. And Terrence Sigil has sort of started to horn in on that space. But at the same time, it's one more factor in this that they spend a lot of time talking about, which is relationships that they had never bothered to make before. Because for the first time, you have three of them have, developed romantic relationships. They've developed friendships with other people, and it's one of the ways in which this book is interesting, because it's about relationships, but it's also about relationships other than romantic ones, which broadens its perspective. And I think, actually, since I'm just about out of time, I will probably talk some more about that next week, probably, assuming I remember. I may not. Anyways, see you all next week.